Before we start today's episode, let me tell you about my latest adventure. Introducing Lux Coffee Co., a specialty-grade coffee company inspired by creativity and creatives. The debut range is sourced from some of the best farms in Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and Africa, offering beautiful flavors and notes. Our single origins and house blends are roasted every Monday for next day shipping. Visit luxcoffee.co.uk and use code PODCAST for 15% off your first order. And yes, there's exceptional merch too. Lux Coffee Co. is where art meets exceptional coffee.
I think sometimes people don't perhaps understand what we are or what we do. We don't necessarily go out and pitch for work or anything like that, really. We work in a super organic way, but also a lot of the work we do is self-initiated. We find ways to make some kind of income from doing the work that we do. And I think that also differentiates us as well from other agencies, I guess, working locally, that we're working in such a way like this. And I think there's probably a bit of, hopefully a lot of, I guess, respect.
Welcome to Mindful Creative Podcast, a show about understanding how to deal with the highs and lows of creative lives. My name is Wright and Richard, and creativity changed my life, but it also nearly killed me. In this season, inspired by my book of the same title, I am talking to some of the most celebrated figures in the creative industry. In our candid conversations, my guests share their experiences and how they overcame their challenges and struggles, how they learned to grow as creatives. A creative career in the 21st century can be overwhelming. I wanted to capture these honest and transparent conversations that might help you find that guiding light in your career. So, thank you for joining me on this episode and taking the first or next step towards regaining control of your creative life. You ready? Today I was speaking to two creative powerhouses. They share passion for art, design, technology, socially engaged practice, and creative placemaking. They run a multidisciplinary creative agency called Ville, as well as All Flows, an international creative design and digital conference that is held annually in Milton Keynes. In this conversation, we talk about their drive to create intimate, inspirational events with a commitment to quality programming and community building. Today we talk about Milton Keynes, highlighting its rich history of using art to build community and its radical approach to urban design that attracted influential architects and designers. It's my pleasure to introduce Richard Wiggins and Simon Wright. Richard, Simon, how are you doing?
Very well. How are you doing?
Good to chat again, ready?
Yes, it's good to have you on the show. I mean, you guys are doing something remarkable away from London, away from everybody else in your own sort of sphere. And whenever I see your email signature land in my inbox, I was like, I want to speak to these guys because they are as busy as I am. And it's nice to see people doing different things. But for those who have maybe never heard of All Flows, your festival or your creative agency, how would you introduce yourself?
My name's Simon Wright.
And my name is Richard Wiggins.
A bit of background, I guess, would be helpful to contextualize everything. So my background's in contemporary art, and I worked at Milton Keynes Gallery for about 15 years as curator of public programs. And that's where I first met Richard, when I began hosting a long-standing event that he'd been running in Milton Keynes called MK Geek Night. And that had been going for about 12 years now, something like that.
12 and a half years.
And basically I began hosting the event. They'd lost their venue, they needed a new venue, and I offered our space up. And the event had been for creative industries, for the kind of tech community in Milton Keynes, but I guess the kind of surrounding area. It was pulling in people from Nottingham, Oxford, London, all over the place. And Rich and I, over that kind of period of about 5 years, I guess we became friends, and we had lots of shared areas of kind of interest. And then I decided to leave my job at the gallery and go freelance. And Richard and I and another colleague of ours called Daniel Shahadi, who's a graphic designer, we were really interested in developing a new kind of publication for Milton Keynes because we felt that there wasn't really anything talking about Milton Keynes as a place. And just to say, both of us grew up here in Milton Keynes, and we wanted to tell a bit of a different kind of story about the city that wasn't perhaps being told by other sort of local media outlets that were pretty basic, to be honest. So we came together as a group and we came up with the name Ville, which is both the name of the publication but also the name of our kind of creative agency. So Ville is an interesting one. So it's actually the plan that was designed prior to Milton Keynes being designed. So perhaps we can go in a little bit further back towards the kind of the Newtown story and the story of Milton Keynes, perhaps a little bit later. But Ville was a kind of plan put together by an architect and urban designer called Fred Pooley. And this was like in the early 60s, around 61, 62. And he was charged with the idea of designing a new town city for North Buckinghamshire. And that plan got dubbed Pooleyville, and actually it preceded the new plan that came along for the design of Milton Keynes, which eventually Pooleyville was superseded. But it was always something that kind of stuck in my head, this kind of place that was planned for but never actually came into fruition, and then Milton Keynes took over basically. And yeah, it was just a kind of a cute name to talk about kind of place, about a location, and I guess like alternative stories and possible kind of futures. So we were going through this kind of whole process of coming up with this new publication over a course of about, I guess, a kind of 6, 7, 8 months. And a number of other opportunities started to come our way, primarily working with another colleague of ours, Will Cousins, who has a background in architecture and urban design. He was actually part of Milton Keynes Development Corporation in the kind of early 70s as well, and had been working in the city for a long time. He was chair of Milton Keynes Gallery, where I used to work, and he was in very close dialogue with the developers that were coming into Milton Keynes and proposing to develop new sort of multi-use sort of schemes. And we were basically invited by a developer called Socius to develop a kind of meanwhile activation program of a building that they'd just purchased and had plans to redevelop. So we were working quite closely with them over a kind of period of time, hosting kind of exhibitions, running events, doing conferences in this new building that eventually was going to be redeveloped and turned into housing, but also retail, offices, etc., etc. And we also ended up, because of Richard's kind of background in design and web, we ended up doing a lot of work with them on their sort of branding and website for that particular kind of scheme. So the original kind of publication idea actually had to take a little bit of a kind of backseat, and we ended up doing a lot more kind of commissioned work and projects. And then that also led to doing a lot of work with Milton Keynes Council, particularly with the kind of culture and heritage team, mainly with the heritage team, looking back at the kind of Newtown story of the city. And growing up here, we're fascinated by the story of the city and how it came about, its utopian kind of ideals, the way it's used artists to develop new communities, all of those sort of fascinating radical approaches that kind of is under the surface a little bit in Milton Keynes. So we've done a lot of work with the kind of heritage officer, Shane Downer, and done various different kind of projects over the last kind of few years. With Pooleyville, the magazine idea had always been kind of in the back of our minds whilst we were doing all of this other work that was paying the bills. So we launched a kind of bi-weekly newsletter. And that was our kind of starting point, where we were trying to talk about the things that were happening in the city, but perhaps weren't being promoted very much, but also other things that were operating around the area, and also things that kind of caught our mind.
International elements, I guess, is our curated content, the stuff that we have a kind of, I guess, an eye for, or just enjoy looking at or reading. And then so sometimes we like to bring a bit element of that to it as well.
Yeah. So we've just gone past our 100th edition of that. But at the same time, we've been developing the website, which is pouilleville.city, for longer form kind of content. So more kind of commissioned articles, whether it might be a review of an exhibition at MK Gallery, for example, or it might be a piece by a local graphic designer who's been looking at the kind of visual language of Milton Keynes, the kind of graphic design histories and the artworks, etc., and how that sort of influenced his practice, to interviews with photographers like Simon Phipps, who also grew up in Milton Keynes, an amazing kind of photographer of like brutalist architecture. So we've been steadily building up that aspect of, I guess, our kind of creative agency as well, and the publication. At the same time, we've been doing quite a lot of work with Milton Keynes Council around the kind of tech ecosystem in the city. And this is a really big kind of narrative that's been coming through over the kind of last 3 or 4 years. And with another colleague, Oliver Waters, we launched a project called Protospace, which aimed to bring together the tech community in Milton Keynes and really to start to amplify, I guess, the city as a place for innovation, new technology, for startups, for scale-ups, etc. So alongside all of that, we will get to all flows. Alongside all of that, I think we'd probably talked about a conference at some point during a time when Richard was hosting Geek Night at the gallery. We probably had some sort of conversation.
We talked about his ideas, and I'd actually, my friend and a colleague who I run Geek Night with is a chap called David Hughes, one of my good old friends. And we actually did do an all-day conference for Milton Keynes Geek Night back in, I think it's 2014. So that was our, let's try and, we'd been doing Geek Night for a couple of years then. It's like an evening more community event. It was generally free back in the day, and we used to have quite a lot of people attend to that. And we decided to try and do a conference. It was incredibly stressful. We made no money out of it. I spent so much time. I created, because my background is digital design, branding a little bit, predominantly web design back in the day. I created all the assets for it. But one of those things you pour a lot of time into, incredibly stressful. Enjoyed it, but at the same time, you're like, I'm never going to do that again. And we never did, technically. We did talk about it again as part of Geek Night. And then when we were working on other projects and Simon and I to come together, I think really we had too much coffee one day, and we were talking about, I think, some of the speakers we'd got lined up over Geek Night. We often plan ahead for that, even though it's a smaller event. It's typically been run quarterly. We are maybe pushing that back possibly this year for the first time 3 times in a year, just to take a bit of pressure off. But we were like, we've got some really good speakers come up. Some of the people I think you've probably had on your podcast, or certainly know in the past, had spoken. And then we were like, maybe we could do a bigger event. And we'd love to it's not Geek Night, it's not part of our existing kind of community, but do something inspired by other bigger events we've both been to. I've not actually been to OFF, but, I was going to obviously very aware of it and what Hector's doing there. And my friend Mark Thieler runs an event in Germany called Beyond Tellerrand, which has been running for a really long time. And I know Mark for a really long time, and we chat quite a lot. Gone to that a number of times, and other design conferences and around the UK. And just wanted to do something. Maybe we could do something here. And too much coffee, and we got a little bit carried away about what that could be.
And we burst all flow.
So before we talk about all flows in more depth, I never really knew that much about Milton Keynes. I know things are happening in Milton Keynes. I've got one of our friends, Carl Wilkinson's done work with the Unity Place, with Santander. It's happening. We've got actually a client in Milton Keynes for the sort of government-funded startups. So the place is there, but to actually know more about it, I think it needs someone like you to really put it to the forefront. Because whilst you were answering your first question, I've looked it up, and Milton Keynes is only 56 years old.
Mm-hmm.
How does the world of creativity, and how does it work in a place that's young? What sort of effect does it have on creativity and the minds and people overall? Because when you go to places which are much older, you can say, okay, this is inspired by something older. This has got heritage. This has got something behind it. Whereas what you described in your answer was so culturally rich and so enticing, thinking, how does it add up? How does it work?
Yeah, it is a really fascinating place. It's not perfect by any means. And I think from a sort of personal experience, growing up here, all I wanted to do was leave. And I went to study in London and study kind of fine art, and then lived in Brighton, and then gradually ended up coming back to Milton Keynes. But it wasn't until I returned, I think, that I began to understand it a little bit more and see it in a slightly different way. What is really fascinating about the history of the city, for me, is how the arts was used to create community. So the Development Corporation, as well as being incredibly ambitious in terms of how they were physically constructing the space, they were also being really radical in how they were creating communities. So artists were commissioned to come here to be artists in residence, to work with kind of communities, to create that kind of sense of place in something that was entirely new. And this was coming out of the kind of quite radical 1970s community arts movement. So there's really incredible organizations like Interaction were up here. They were doing projects where they were creating their own kind of TV channels. So Milton Keynes had its own TV channel called Channel 40, which was actually, interestingly, it was part of an exhibition that was at Raven Row Gallery in London a couple of years back, all around the kind of community television movement. And then they were also commissioning lots and lots of kind of public art around the city, and that still carries on today. You know, it's still a place, as you said, it's only 56 years old. So it's still a place that's constantly developing. And I think there's that kind of sense of possibility is still very much within the kind of DNA of the city. And that narrative, I think, goes across all of the kind of council, but also, I guess, some of the artistic and the design community. There's still that kind of, it's still growing, it's still developing, but it's also the history of it. It's always been there. I think hopefully we're real sort of champions of this place. And I think we see the possibilities, and having kind of events and doing the kind of projects that we do, hopefully it starts to shout about that a little bit more beyond the city. So we very much see All Flows as a kind of national, international type of event, and bringing kind of new designers, artists, whatever, to Milton Keynes to look at it in a slightly different way.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like more support and information on your creative journey, you can pick up one of my books to help you do just that. My titles cover branding, graphic design, illustration, all the way to career business advice with ideas how to navigate the highs and lows of the creative process. You can pick up signed paperbacks at no extra cost from my store at novemberuniverse.co.uk, and we are shipping worldwide. Use code PODCAST for extra 10% off your order, and you can find the links in the show notes. Any day should be a new book day.
It's interesting thing when you say, like, all I wanted to do is leave. Actually, it doesn't matter wherever you were born. Like, most people were thinking, like, yeah, I've had enough, I want to leave. And then you get a diehards like yourself. They're like, actually, you know what? I'm going to come back and actually make a difference in my community. Because Richard, you were born in Milton Keynes, right?
Yeah, I was born, technically we didn't have a hospital then, but we're just on the road, and I have a lot of, my parents actually built in central Milton Keynes very early on in the early 80s. Then we lived on the outskirts like for a few years, but very close by, and then literally moved into central Milton Keynes and in a self-built house at a brand new school. Again, because everything was so new, these estates were literally coming up, and that is only, funnily enough, is only just over the road really from where we are now. So yeah, I literally grew up here, went to school here, and then I actually stayed here. I didn't actually end up going to university, but partially by choice. I'd kind of like wanted to just get into a career. I knew I was actually interested in design and graphic design, and actually started as a career as a web designer back when web design was very new. Back in the late 90s, when majority of people didn't even have an internet connection back then. And that kind of like got me even more solidified that I was interested in design. Okay, I went into some web design area, and then a few years later, probably about 6 years later, I ventured out and just started on my own, doing, I guess, a freelance piece of business, but basically just worked for myself. And I had basically done that ever since, until basically Simon and I met and we started Pulio together. And then I think through starting things like, I would go out to these other events. This is how I was always I guess I liked living here, again, quite critical of various things, but I kind of a little bit, probably back in there, I was a bit more of my siloed thing. And I used to go out to London or to the Oxford or to further afield to Germany to go these other events. And there must be people here. It's one of those ones where if you build it, hopefully they will come. And when we started Geek Night, that was back when Twitter worked, when it was actually a nice place to be and actually had meaningful connections and friends online on that platform. And we started with a tweet, and I think we were close to around about 100 people at our first event. And I'm not mostly from the city, but also from London and a few other places. And this was like, to be fair, we had a couple of really good speakers. We had John Hicks, who's an old friend who was quite well known for doing a lot of icon design, did a lot of stuff did the Firefox logo back in the day, and did a lot of work with Spotify and things like that. And then Brendan Dawes, you might know Brendan yourself, and he's a friend and actually spoken at a couple of Geek Nights, and actually has spoken at All Flows last year as well. So they were kind of like our first speakers at a small community event. It was pretty good. They were friends. We knew them between David and myself. But the reason for doing it was like a little bit selfishness. I was tired of like always having to go to Oxford or always having to go to London or wherever to go to events like this. And back in 2012, there wasn't really much going on here around that scene. And it was just like, let's just try it. And initially, it was going to be a meetup in a pub, and then we said, no, actually, let's have a bit more structure to that. Let's put some talks on. Really informal, though. We'll have some beers. Maybe if we might get some pizza in. And that went from there, really. And that's how I guess is my first, to me personally, is like my personal dipping my toe in the ocean to doing a bit more community-based stuff and really getting actually involved with other people here. And it's through that, then I ended up over the years, become a lot of friends, but also Simon mentioned Oliver, who we do this other element protest space with, and he started an event a couple of years after that, and it was, I guess, probably partly because he started coming to Geek Night, or that thing started happening a little bit in that kind of a creative and slightly tech side of it as well. And obviously now, as any city, there's always a million meetups and events going on every day of the week, really. But yeah, I'm from here and I'm still championing a lot of things creative and outside of that as well.
I will ask you in a second about the community aspect, and I'll ask you more about how you built it, because back in the day, Twitter was fantastic when it worked. And let's not talk about what it is now. But I want to talk about actually the city for a bit longer, because it's a new city. Like some cities got obviously their heritage, they've got their sort of signage, you can see stuff. Whereas for something which is only that many years old, did it feel to you like that when you were coming back from London and see like reflecting on the architecture, reflecting on signage? Because in a way, I would hope that there was not too much of a sort of really old, crappy design to deal with. When you say the legacy design is fruitful, I mean, it's beneficial to our creative inspiration, where sometimes, for example, where I grew up, I'd rather forget everything I've seen because it was just like 80s design that was just done to be. So did you, with your surroundings, how much were you aware of the fact that you were dealing with something where it was just finished? And you said like your parents built in central Milton Keynes, and there was no hospital before. And I think you got to see a build of the city from a different perspective to many other people in the UK. So creatively, did you have even chance to be aware of the fact that that's something that's happening compared to the other cities?
I don't think it's until I actually came back that I realised its impact after being away. And then when I was at Milton Keynes Gallery, we were doing quite a lot of work with some of the original kind of architects and urban designers and people that had worked for Milton Keynes kind of Development Corporation. So I was aware of this is a really different place to live. I think what's also really beautiful about it is that it's an incredibly green city, despite it being ultimately built for the car, because it's on a big grid system and it's super convenient. There's actually a really beautiful landscape that's been purposely designed. But yeah, I think really understanding its kind of history when I came back from London and Brighton, and understanding how much of a kind of radical proposition it was, made me look at things, differently. And to hear directly from those people that had been involved in its kind of creation was a real privilege as well, I think. And those kind of stories, often that generation, sadly, they're dying out, and preserving those kind of stories. And there's great kind of archival organisations in the city that are preserving those kind of histories and those stories about the place. They were working with some of the most kind of interesting architects and graphic designers, artists of that era. They were in a really amazing position where they were like, here's a piece of land, here's a significant amount of money to create this new place for 250,000 people. And it had all of the kind of radical thinking that was going on within the kind of late 60s and early 70s infused into it. And it had people like Buckminster Fuller was coming over to give talks to the Development Corporation. Terence Conran was circling around it. There was really radical architects from the Architecture Association. Archigram built a playground in Milton Keynes. That was one of their only kind of constructed projects. So there's all of these kind of incredible people that are revered today that were actually working on Milton Keynes when they were very, very young architects or designers. So I think we've got a lot to talk about on a sort of national and international level around our kind of design heritage. And I think really, perhaps for us, All Flows is just a continuation of that legacy. And I'm sure in 10, 15, 20 years' time, there'll be another couple of youngsters doing something interesting in the city. So you feel like you have the opportunity here to make something happen and people are receptive to it. And you're allowed to take risks, which that doesn't always happen.
It's so easy to be working as a creative seclusive. I'm like, yeah, nothing's going around, is there? Nothing's really going on. And then you realize, actually, there's lots of people thinking the same, and all it really takes is a tweet in your case and actually asking a few friends to come up and do something about it. So that must have been quite a satisfying feeling to actually see that there's people around you thinking the same or similar and being inclined in the way of appreciating creativity. So what was the buzz like when the first Geek Nights happened? And yeah, how did you feel like spurred on? Because that was not the one with the first Too Much Caffeine, was it?
No, All Flows was Too Much Caffeine. No, I think Geek Night was probably down the pub. I suspect from what I remember. I think initial chats, I think it was over a few beers. So these ideas are often born out of a coffee shop or a pub usually, I think, in my experience. But yeah, it was great when you did it and we did it. And okay, we were lucky enough to have John and Brendan come and speak at the first one. But yeah, having that many people turn up in actually quite an iconic building now. It's the old bus station here, and it was a community space for a while, or community ran space. It was a great event space, and we just did it there, and it was pretty lo-fi. The audio was crap. They had their own basic mic there, which I think the first event we got away with it, but having, again, it was something like close to 100. A lot of people sat on the floor. There wasn't enough tables and chairs, but it was just kind of like, it was great. It was just a nice, like, chill vibe. And we always tended to do back in those days, it's kind of like, I think we even started our first event. We had 5 talks. We had 2 slightly longer talks, and then we'd always have 3 sort of maybe 5-minute talks, and that worked quite well. And I don't know if we started it back then, but what we still do now, and we have done for a very long time, we do what we call 1-minute wonders. So they do like pitch type talks, but we try to say it's not a commercial pitch. It's more if you're looking for staff or you're looking to start an event or something more to that. And again, that's always been really good. But yeah, I remember doing it and we were like, okay, well, we'll do this again then. And it was like, I can't remember exactly, such a long time ago. We put it out there and it was even busier the second one. And again, a couple of friends we knew came along, well, not from Milton Keynes to speak at that. I remember the second one, we had a lot of audio problems where it was just so busy and the mics were great and the receivers, they just kept cutting out. So we're like, going forward in future, we have to figure something out. And randomly, some people who were there in the room, we were about to try and find someone to help us, and they contacted us. And what's really, really nice is they don't even live in Milton Keynes. They've been helping us at every single Geek Night since. And that was just kind of like, it's great that they basically give up their time to help us because they're like audio gurus and they knew exactly what they were doing. And literally, so from that onwards, we had really good audio and tech. But it was always, we always set the bar quite high with who we brought in to speak, even though it is a more community event. We always wanted to do it really well. And actually, for certainly, I guess, in those kind of, certainly those sort of circles when there was, back in the day, there was events like New Adventures in web design. And if you knew that one, Simon Collison was an old friend who used to run that. And we actually, like, Geek Night got quite well known. We were up for some Netamag community awards back in the day, and we went to the Netamag awards and when that existed and things like that. And it was a community event, but actually, because I think we all set the bar really high, we wanted to deliver, make sure, and even now, people come and speak who come from some of those circles. Oh yeah, I know of you, or I know my friend's spoken in the past, or various things like that. And although it is not a big event, it's still got a good reputation. And I think, again, it's just us. I guess where we've come to, we noticed that.
It's consistency and persistence.
Yeah, persistent. Again, trying to, it was never the plan to be running it more, probably even more than 2 or 3 years. There wasn't a plan. It was like to be still running it now over 12 years later is a bit madness, really. But also proud of that. And we've been brought into things from the city point of view, from the council. I met Prince William back a number of years ago at an event that the council ran as, I guess, running this community. And so those opportunities came up. But I think, or there was, I don't think it went in, but there was something around when Milton Keynes went through actual city bid and got city status. There was some sort of, I remember it coming up in conversation with the council. I don't think it was included. I don't know. But it's nice to be part of that. And I guess there's still a lot of people in the city have no idea we exist, which is one of those things. It probably happens in all other cities. Certainly in Milton Keynes, there's definitely a lot of people in our creative or tech sectors who don't know the things we do, but that's fine. There's enough people who know.
And I guess that goes back to why we started the magazine as well, to try and talk about these sorts of things, to try and get more people to know that this Geek Night was happening or other interesting events were happening.
And I think it's always been quite a bit of a struggle, whether it is the design of the city, which we are fans of a lot of what it does. It's always quite hard to bring some of these things to people's attention or to cut through. There's a lot of disconnection with creative in what's going on in Milton Keynes, with music, what's going on in Milton Keynes. Certainly with tech, which is why we were involved with the other element. That was that what our proposal back was to try and bring a bit more cohesiveness and trying to let some of these people and projects and events to light, really. And All Flows is just that on steroids for us, really. It'd probably be a lot easier to do this event not in Milton Keynes, if we're honest. We have challenges here. We struggle with good venues here. I'm not saying good, just the right kind of venues here. We're not an old city which is full of like loads of old interesting spaces. Because it is this new city, it doesn't have that. There are spaces and they're either brand new and they're not quite right, or they're quirky, because we have challenges with that. I'm still working through those now. But yeah, and also bringing people here. We're not London, we're not Berlin, we're not Vienna, we're not Amsterdam or Manchester, whatever. It's definitely a challenge in terms of perceptions, people's perceptions of Milton Keynes as well, and trying to change that a little bit. Not just through All Flows, but all you, Ville, and other people here, by trying to highlight what they're doing as well.
Richard, we have spoken a few times, and I did ask you, did you ever consider doing it anywhere else? And now I've spoken to you for half an hour, and I've got so many reasons now understanding why you do what you do and where you do it, because it is quite a unique sort of setup. Because I think because of the canvas, of the backdrop that you've got there, to where you started, it makes perfect sense, because you can cave in and say, okay, we can host it in Somerset House because someone's given us a space. That would be easier. However, I think that reward would be totally different. It might seem almost like a cop-out, because if you've been building your community in Milton Keynes from grassroots level all the way to where you are now, like, it does make sense that even going against some of the limitations and constraints that the city provides you with, it does make sense to do it that way, because I can sense like how much it means to you guys to actually be there and how much to actually put it on the map. Because just like you started your first Geek Nights, and with a tweet and getting people in, it just grows from there. So how did you feel about having an idea, okay, we lost money, but we're going to do it again and we're going to grow it and see what happens?
Yeah, I think for that, it was a long time ago. We're talking well over a decade ago, we did that event. And yeah, it was a challenge. And that was probably a bit, there was generally people from the UK attending that. But it's a little bit scary. I'm definitely a bit risk adverse for us to do this. And actually, fair, it's probably not the most sensiblest idea when events are struggling. They're starting to come back a bit now, but definitely we're coming into our third year. It was 2 years ago, only 3 years ago, we launched our first one, and events weren't where they were. So it's quite scary in a post-COVID world where the industry has changed and people, the way they buy tickets, I think it's slowly changing. But certainly a couple of years ago or 2-3 years ago, it was tough. So probably not the most smartest idea to do this. And it's just the two of us behind All Flows. I guess that 99% of the time in reality is like we have a really great volunteer team and people who come in and who really help us, and friends throughout support in different ways, and partners. But it's the two of us, and we put a lot of time and passion into it. And it's a tricky one for us because it's a passionate projects at the moment, but at the same time, when you're spending months and months on it, you need to pay the bills as well. For us, it's going in the right direction as an event. It's still growing, but yeah, I think we'd love to, if there was maybe the right venue, scale it a little bit. But we've talked about this, and we never want to be big. We want it to be like that intimacy of what it is, and especially our first year, both the last 2 years, we appreciate not all the speakers can stay around for a whole 2-3 days. Some of them did, and when they do, it's great, and it's that ability to just chat, in the breaks or at lunchtime, or go for a beer after, or have dinner. And people were doing that. And we heard some of those from some of the people from outside of the city, and some people who we know, I guess, friends in the city who attended, and they were like, yeah, it's great. We went to lunch with Kate and she was lovely. It's nice when those kind of like connections form and you really get to meet people in the event. And I guess that's what I've experienced at some of the events I've been to, especially like Mark's event in Germany, for example, where it's, okay, maybe 700 or 800 people, it scales a little bit, but I'm lucky enough to meet a lot of speakers, I guess, through knowing Mark, but spending time with them and spending time with other people, made friends. And there's ones I used to go to, I was only held one in Ville in Belfast. I'm still connected with some of these people who I met over a few days back then at an event. And I think that's nice. And again, maybe at those much bigger events, and don't get me wrong, they're amazing, but you don't get that connection and the chance to, have conversations a bit more and bump into the same people more than once. I think that's nice. And so, we do want to grow it.
But not too big.
But it's been good. We have ambitious ideas for sure about, I guess, not saying in terms of the scale, but how we can amplify it all the time. We're always trying to think about within our very small budget and time what we can do and how we can make it better and make it more fun and more inspiring, really.
There's a common theme that I speak to people on this podcast who say the words, who are very much doers, but they will always say, I'm a bit risk adverse. Everyone says I'm risk adverse. And I'm like, but you're doing more things than anybody else. Like lots of people, and it just strikes me as an interesting topic because I do quite a few things myself, but am I risk adverse? Maybe. I think there's this amazing juxtaposition and contradiction. Like it's an amazing contradiction. Like when people say, I'm a risk adverse, but this is everything I do. And I'm like, what is it really?
Yeah, you're right. And I probably couldn't, but I definitely feel like I'm risk averse. But at the same time, then both of us had been very much, let's just do stuff. Let's go in and outside of what we do. We're always probably ones who just do things.
I think it's internally or within the three of us who run the agency. We're constantly, I think, grappling with what are we as a creative agency? Yes, we do lots of different things and we work across lots of different sectors. And I think sometimes people don't perhaps understand what we are or what we do. We don't necessarily go out and pitch for work or anything like that, really. We work in a super organic way, but also a lot of the work we do is self-initiated. We find ways to make some kind of income from doing the work that we do. And I think that also differentiates us as well from other agencies, I guess, working locally, that we're working in such a way like this. And I think there's probably a bit of, hopefully a lot of, I guess, respect. And we've had those kind of conversations with other sort of friends in the sector that they really love the way that we work and the things that we do and what we're trying to do for the city and trying to put it on the map with all of these kind of different dispersed kind of projects that we do. Yeah. Does that make sense? I think it makes sense. Makes sense.
How do you support each other as, obviously, like you work in a partnership, there's three of you in the agency, there's other people involved. When things get hard, how do you metabolize things?
I think we've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
And initially it was the kind of host-client kind of relationship when I began hosting Geek Night at the gallery. But it obviously just became very clear that we had lots of shared interests and both equally passionate about the place. And I think Rich is an incredible hard worker. I'm a little bit more flighty and all over the shop. So there's a really nice kind of complement, I think, between the two of us. And Will is a little bit like the kind of elder statesman of the business. And he's equally has these kind of flights of fancy, but also he's done some kind of incredible projects throughout his kind of career and have this incredible knowledge and set of kind of contacts. So I think as a kind of trio, we've got this kind of really, really healthy mix between us. And things get hard, things get frustrating.
I think one of the biggest frustrations we have is because we're not, to our sometimes a little bit of our detriment, not really fully commercially minded. We're not going into this with, we didn't start this as a business it was almost a side project to start with. The magazine has always been this kind of, and it still is a side project as part of what we do. That's why it's taken a back seat because, you need to at least try and pay the bills and go down other routes. And I guess in theory, also, it's not a business idea. We're just coming out because let's do it. Why not? Yeah, again, too much coffee. Why not? Again, some to our detriment. We're not business enough minded, really. And we're not Even though I've worked for myself for a long time, and I guess you come from a slightly different background, neither of us are particularly that way inclined. I guess even when I was freelance for a long time, I was never like really business. I never did networking. I never was that great at marketing myself. I just managed to almost stumble my way through many years of still doing that career. And I think that's sometimes where we struggle and a little bit. But at the same time, in one regard, it's quite nice. We haven't got somebody saying you need to do this project to pay. We probably should. It'd be good if we had that. You need to get this. But I think we are very organic and we go after stuff and we are a bit more passion led with what we do. And we certainly wouldn't be going and doing things like All Flows. It's certainly not, because I said, a commercial reason. We'd love to start making money of it out down the line, and hopefully we'll get there at some point. But we're coming into it because it'd be really cool to do this in our city and do an event like this, and let's do it. Why not? And let's be ambitious of who we ask and try and get to come and speak at it. And we're already speaking to one or two people about 2026 because they can't do this year, but those conversations are happening. So we're pushing forward, and we're already talking about 2027 because that's the city's 60th birthday and it'll be our 5th year. We have quite a close alignment and we do quite a lot with the city council. Our event is referenced in the 5-year cultural and tech strategy for the city. All Flows is in there. That's part of as a key thing. So it's nice. It's been recognised, but also at the same time, it's challenging as well to sort of put it out there. But we have a good local audience. I mean, we're not talking big numbers, but it's exciting when we do see people from Germany or the Netherlands or Portugal buying tickets, or Copenhagen, to come to our event into Milton Keynes, coming specifically for our event. Our first event, we have pretty much zero social media traction and like no losing. And we had people coming over from Michigan State University in the whole cohort, and it was a bit mad for us, really. I know it doesn't seem much for some of the events, but this is our first year, and they were like, did you come for other? No, we literally just came for your event over from Michigan, and that was it. And then they went home again, and they were great. But it's nice, and that's, for us, it's enlightening and it's exciting. And again, we're not talking hundreds or thousands of people, but it means a lot to us.
And like you said as well, it's going back to that smaller scale events, it's a kind of, hopefully that's a really positive memory that they will go away with back to Michigan and talk about Milton Keynes and talk about All Flows and the kind of things that are happening here. So that's our kind of compensation, I guess, for the months of work that we put into it. And I think also just thinking about, we really pain over the lineup of speakers. We only have 12 speakers, and we do over the course of the kind of 2 days. And we started to experiment a little bit with kind of panel discussions, and we had a panel discussion last year, and we give lots of time between the kind of speakers as well, so those moments where audiences can interact and speakers can interact with the audience is kind of really, really important in terms of the structure of it. But yeah, we do a lot of research, and we look and we listen to talks and we read things, and we try to curate these kind of lineups that we're really excited about, and hopefully the audiences are as well. And I guess it is that moment between our kind of two respective kind of backgrounds, really. My background coming from a more contemporary arts, culture kind of background, and Richard's kind of more design, web design. And he's been plugged into that scene a lot more for a long period of time through kind of Geek Night. So we've got this kind of interesting mix of how we kind of program.
You've literally read my mind, because my next question was going to be all about curation. Like, how do you put this together? How do you gauge the interest potential? Are you selfish in your sort of curation, thinking, this is the people we want to see, we're going to put it on and see if anyone shows up? Or actually, are you trying to skew it potentially, like, this is what people might want to see? How do you do this?
We do pour a lot of time into that curation, and we have been, by quite a lot of people who have attended the last couple of years, being complimented on that. And again, that means a lot to us. People come up and say how we have curated not just the lineup, but how it flows over the course of the 2 days as well. But to come back, I think in one way we are a little bit selfish to a certain extent, because we look for people who are like, who would you want to see? Who would we find interesting? And sometimes we have to pull back, because we're not always obviously sat next to each other. Sometimes it's over Slack or whatever it may be. You're like, oh, this could be good, or this could be good. Sometimes you're like, actually their work's amazing, but do they talk? So then you have to go down that rabbit hole, because we're not always looking at I guess there is an element of, there's lots of events, don't get me wrong, but there is obviously, you get a bit of a speaker circuit, right? You have had that. I've had, through the web industry back in the day, there was always like, you'd see the same speakers popping up. Don't get me wrong, we booked them myself back in the day and had that, and it's great because often they'll pull in people who know them and maybe gets bums on seats. And we do want a little bit, sometimes you want someone who's well known, but we don't want to have them just because they're well known. We still want to have them because of their great speaker or their content's amazing, or usually both. But sometimes there are curveballs that we both throw in, or I don't have no idea who this person is. And we both do that. Sometimes you start going looking them up and you actually, that could be really interesting. And sometimes, not being favourites, they often come out and be the best talks, right? Because you've not heard them before, but also they're just coming at it from a different perspective or whatever it may be. But it's been really nice with that, and it's been really nice with Geek Night over the years as well, with that kind of his discoveries a little bit. But it's been really good, and I guess through some of those, for us as well, friendships have formed with not just our audience, but some of the speakers. And we have somebody coming back, who spoke last year, he wants to get involved again this year. No, not as speaking, but to do something else around music and performance. So we're having those conversations, and he's like, I just want to get involved. And I loved speaking, I loved the event, and hung around. So there's those kinds of things, and we want to give space to that. We're like, yeah, let's make this happen. We'll figure out as part of the program. So that also, I think, quite in an exciting way for us, is we're not completely pinned down of what the structure has to be. It's not a drastic thing, but we're moving our start time back a tiny bit from, I think we were like 9:30 the last couple of years, and we're like, actually, let's start it about 10:30. It gives a bit more time. We'll run a little bit later. We had a very small closing gathering party the first 2 years. We're having as an opening party this year on the day of the first event. So let's mix it up. We think more people are likely to be around. Some people have to disappear on a Friday after work and stuff, or go back to London or get flights or whatever it may be, or go back to Manchester. So yeah, we're changing, but we also want to make space for if people like doing other creatives. We're having another conversation about a drawing event, which we're going to go to in London this week, who's someone we're really connected to, and we're talking about bringing that to All Flows, so fitting that as part of the program, because it sounds like it's really good fun and would be a perfect fit for us. So it's how we add to that as well.
Yeah. I think people are curious, like when we reach out, because they're doing this thing in Milton Keynes. And I think people are curious about that. And I think the first year like Richard said, we had no traction, no sort of social media following whatsoever, but we pulled together a pretty incredible kind of lineup of speakers. And that kind of came from, just real cold calling. Hey, Ian Anderson, Designers Republic, do you want to come and talk at our first event? We don't know what it's going to be like. And he said yes. And then other people like Ava Kramer's, Steph, David Sheldon Hicks, who's now from Territory Studios. He's become a real champion and friend, and lives locally, even though he's running this kind of international agency. So he's introduced us to people or suggested people. So it's all been organic and developing kind of over time. And I think we also, as Richard said, we are having these kind of conversations for next year. And we do want to bring in some like big hitters. I think Ian was a pretty big hitter in terms of the kind of UK graphic design kind of scene, but we want to amplify the kind of speakers that we have, as well as to give kind of opportunities for perhaps more younger emerging creatives coming through as well. And just in terms of like discipline, it's so broad. Richard's incredibly passionate about photography, so we're always thinking that we'd really like to invite an amazing kind of photographer to come and talk. And Laura Panak, who spoke last year, she was brilliant, incredible speaker. And then you'd have Akil Benjamin from Kamuzi doing a talk, or Brendan talking last year. So it's this kind of real interesting kind of mix. And perhaps sometimes it does become a little bit too esoteric. And there has been conversations that we've had with audience members who perhaps want to get into the kind of nitty gritty of the business side of it and how it might be useful for them. And I think that's incredibly important as well. I think we need to think about how we kind of can put these sort of programs together that are inspirational, but also useful for the broader community, creative industries community.
But I think what I want, the number one thing, is to really inspire people. And I think that's what not from what we're doing, but as from any event, is for people to come away feeling energized and inspired. And we certainly heard it. We heard it both years, but certainly the first year when it felt like quite a few people we knew personally had attended. And I've not been through anything like this for years, and I needed it. I needed it. And having conversations after where they're just like going at you because they're so buzzing. And even last year we had some like local students who, as part of like a scholarship bursary, who were a local graphic, studying graphic design. And they came, and some were volunteering, some were on like a scholarship bursary ticket. And they were just like the after party chatting to them, and they were just like so energetic and just, this was amazing, and asking questions and really curious about how we do it. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah, I think that's definitely really key, like how They weren't aware of Geek Night. They weren't really aware of All Flow. So it's like how we're providing those kind of opportunities for kind of students, there's young people that are here to come and experience the festival, to meet other kind of people working in the industry locally, but also having that kind of incredible lineup of inspiring creatives to listen to over the course of the kind of couple of days. Hopefully that then will birth other things happening in the city. We want these younger generations coming through, doing things in Milton Keynes. I think that's also a really important part of what we do. And I think that's why the council have been a supporter of ours right from the beginning, that we're able to touch lots of different areas with the top route approach that we're taking to Auckland.
Before I let you go, what is your dream guest and what's the type of a talk you would like to achieve at All Flows?
We don't want to say names. We have booked somebody who's on the list and confirmed for 2026. That's our first actual confirmed speaker for next year. But we've had some conversations with people who are already we're reaching out to these people. And again, I don't want to say their names specifically because they might not happen, but they might happen, and we'll work hard on that. But for me, I don't know, it was never like one person who would be my dream speaker. I guess there's always that, and almost be cautious of it. Is there someone who's amazingly creative and you really look up to in that kind of creative industries, whatever they do, but maybe who also cuts across the kind of genre? Because a lot of these people, unless you are in a creative, there's a lot of people still don't, you can say, okay, they are an amazing, high profile, legendary designer or photographer or whatever they do, or filmmaker, but they're not, we're not household name, is there? I don't know. And I'm not something we've talked about, but we're not saying we've spoken, this Stefan Sagmeister, okay? I'm not saying we're not someone we're going, I haven't spoken to going up, but as an example, extremely well known across those creative industries, spoken all over, a bit of a legend, but you'd still ask most people and they would never have heard of them unless you're in a creative industry. So I guess maybe I'm not saying that's something we go after because I'd always be a bit hesitant, but maybe there's that somebody you'd be interested to find, or who is that? Those interesting people. I guess it would be a great press thing. You're going to draw people in if you got somebody, oh my God, they've got that person. And, that's really cool, but that would be interesting in one regard, but hesitant in another regard. And yeah.
So I think that's a really tough question. Yeah, I think we want to surprise us as well. Yeah, I can't really think of anyone off the top of my head.
No, not one person.
Yeah.
I enjoyed learning about how you guys put this together and how you do this, and actually that true dedication to the city and what you're doing for the city, because as you Simon said, at one stage of your life you wanted to run away, and only when you came back you realized the impact of the city that it had on you, and that's invaluable. Like, you can't put it into any sort of metric because it just how it makes you feel is what matters the most. So yeah, I think what you guys do, and especially with everything that you do, I think is remarkable, because it maybe feels like the city, Ville, is one of its kind in a way. And yeah, what you guys are doing is one of its kind again. So yeah, it's been great to learn more about you, to hear about your passion, your selfishness, good selfishness. And yeah, I can't wait to see what you guys do with the event in the future. Thank you.
Cool.
Really great to chat to you today.
Thank you. Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of Mindful Creative Podcast. I'd love to know your thoughts, questions, or even suggestions, so please get in touch via the show notes or social channels. This episode was produced and presented by me, Wright and Richard. Editing and audio production was masterfully done by Neil McKay from 7 Million Bikes Podcast, and the theme music was written and produced by Jack James. Thank you, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Hey, just a quick note to say thank you for joining me on this episode. If this is your first time or you're a regular listener, please take a minute and rate the show on your chosen platform. A short review helps every show to be more visible to new listeners and provide them with value. So thank you for helping out. Thank you.